Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, a show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is more, how do you get there?
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm. Don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Yes, indeed. We're back.
Already?
Yeah, welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
It's only been 2 months since we've been.
10 weeks, so 2.5 months, I think, technically. But yeah, that was a long time. Our last interview was with Astrid.
From Sweden.
In Sweden. And that was great, and we talked about a lot of things, and it seemed like we were just kind of getting into it when it was really time to let her go to bed.
Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Our shows are going to be broadcasting now Sundays and Wednesdays at noon Montana time, which is 8 a.m. Hawaii time and 8 p.m. in the European Union and South Africa. Mm-hmm. And 9 p.m. in St. Petersburg, Russia. So those are all the places that we've had guests in so far. We've had people from, of course, various time zones across the U.S., but it's lovely to have friends of the show tuning in from all over the planet.
All over the planet.
We don't really have to, we haven't yet had to accommodate anybody in mainland China.
I had to scoot back a little bit because our guest looks a little small.
We don't have a broadcast table that's curved, so the middle person is always going to look way smaller than us.
Tiny, and we'll work on it.
Yeah, I'll just hide this little chat until someone shows up and joins us and starts chatting. And then people can see our beautiful guest this afternoon.
All right, well.
Does our guest have a name?
We haven't named her yet. Maybe this would be a part of the season 2 episode, season 2, part 2, episode 0 task is that our audience can help name our guest.
That's right. Can everybody hear us all right? Is everybody working?
Our pundit is filling in for we don't always have guests.
No.
So
that's not the nature of the show.
Let's call this our intern.
Some shows do always have guests, and some shows never have guests, and our show is neither of those things.
So yeah, I have some stuff set up for today's show. I thought since we've been gone for a while, and since we are officially launching our website today, I thought we would spend some time letting people know who we are and why we're here and what we're doing. Just a little re-up.
Yeah. Yeah, why are we doing this show? Do you have an elevator pitch yet? Why are we doing this show?
Why are we doing this show? Well, let me just start with what is the show, and then we can talk about why we're doing it. Is a difficult word. I know, it's problematic. I want to know what the hell's going on. In general.
In the world?
Yeah. Sometimes I want to know what the hell's going on with politics. Sometimes I want to know what's going on with high-profile medical issues. Sometimes I want to know what's going on in the world of finance and the economy, since we're all affected by it. Sometimes I want to know what's going on. There's so many different things, aspects, technology. There's so many things I'm interested in the world that I want to know what's going on. And I think it's really difficult to negotiate a lot of the landscape that we live in because of the social media and corporate media influence in how we get information. So we like to try to find out what's going on. And in that process, we like to show people how we're informing ourselves. Because I think it's a really greasy process trying to get good information from sources that you can trust. There's a lot of distrust going on in a lot of our ancient institutions, medical institutions, political institutions, media institutions. There's reason to have some critical eye on those things whenever they're giving you information. So I think that now more than any other time in my life, it's important to know where you're getting your information. You want to put our show card up? Shove it right up in its face?
I will.
I think for a long time, people were not concerned about food that they put in their bodies. They were just happy to have food. And then suddenly, I don't know, in the 70s or so, people started saying, hey, maybe we should be careful about what we eat because of the new kind of food systems that we have. Canned food, processed food.
Everyone was so excited about canned
additives in food and all that business. So then suddenly people started wondering, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
So if you put in some nutrient-rich food, you'll have maybe a better shot than putting in a bunch of processed, chemicalized food. So people started becoming aware of how they take care of their bodies through the food that they eat. I think what I would like to see happening in the world that I live in is people would become more aware of what they feed their head. We've gotten used to really easy, accessible information.
We've gotten used to trusting certain things.
Just information. We have information all around us, and a lot of that information is sponsored. I would say that it's chemically processed. A lot of that information is going through filters, and those filters are demographics. Those filters are like, how many clicks can I get off of this? More than, let's say, if it was traditional news, information that helps inform the society so that we can work as a informed populace to make choices for ourselves and our society. When information is coming at you, not through that filter, but like, how do I keep your eyeballs glued to my page so I can sell you some Fritos?
As long as possible.
Yeah, it's a different motivation. So I think it's important to know where you're getting your news. Oh my God, what's going on?
Sorry, I forget that when you just go to it, you just go to a YouTube page and it's like, I'm back. Like, I wasn't trying to play you, yo. Shout out to Tammy Strong in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Oh, look, there's people.
And DJ Savage in Troy, Montana.
Right on.
Sweet.
So the general idea is I feel like I want to know what's going on, and I don't always know the best options for information or for resources. So I share with you folks where I've gotten my information, how I got my information, with the hope that maybe if people have a better avenue than I found, that you'll let me know.
So that's like your onus for Post-Orthodoxy is to like share reliable information with people.
I want to know what's going on in the world, and I want to share my process so it can be refined if I'm doing it wrong.
So you want to share reliable information with people and have people give you feedback.
Well, that's the whole point of the live stream. Mm-hmm. If you're watching this right now, you have the option to participate in the conversation. You can ask questions, and then we can answer questions. You can provide sources that maybe we didn't have access to, because there's so many sources of information. Mm-hmm. Some of them often provide good information, but I don't share those sources because I don't like who's funding that organization, or I don't like necessarily the political partisanship of that information. Now, if I do share information from one of those, I do like to say this is coming from a highly partisanized source.
Yep.
But let's not shoot the messenger. Let's look at the message. Mm-hmm. Because if the message in there is CDC data, it doesn't matter who shared it. They're going to put their spin on it, but then you can go to the CDC, because maybe I didn't know about that CDC data.
Right, because that CDC data isn't being broadcast on mainstream news sources.
Right. So maybe I need to go to a right-wing source where they found that, and then through them go to the information, make up my own mind. So this is kind of the process we're engaged in. That was not the original intention of the show, I don't think, but it's what it's become.
What do you think the original intention of Post-Orthodoxy was?
Your turn.
No, I'm really curious. These are, we're always learning.
Right. Post show card.
We're going to make these in like real life and make them super fancy.
Heterodoxy is the same thing as Post-Orthodoxy, which, if you look up the definition of heterodoxy, deviation from accepted or orthodox standards or beliefs. I was raised in a hardcore right-wing Christian cult, diehard Republican household. As a 4-year-old, I didn't know what any of that meant. But that's what I was.
That was your world.
That was my world. That's how I identified, because I would get hit if I didn't identify that way. If I even looked at anything outside of the orthodox views of my family, traitor, probably going to hell. So
right.
There's not a lot of motivation to go post-orthodox when you're raised in a cult. There's a lot of motivation to stay within the orthodox views. Having deprogrammed myself over the course of 30 years or more at this point from that programming, it has given me an eyeball towards cult-like behaviors in less severe forms that are endemic in our culture. For instance, one of the things I like to, and this doesn't, I'm not taking sides, but this is just a nice example. When we start doing our election circus, and my Democrat friends post blue no matter who on their little circle identifier, that to me is a totalitarian fascist trope.
It's cult-like behavior because you shouldn't just, like, people shouldn't be voting for a team. They should be voting for morals, ideals, and ethics.
You should vote for the person and what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so when you say, no, we're just voting blue no matter who, that is a cult-like behavior that is encouraging cult-like behavior that doesn't have discernment or critical thinking involved, and I think that's dangerous.
Yeah.
So my motivation for starting post-orthodoxy is looking at cult-like behavior in orthodoxies of religion, science, sex, politics, economics, geology. Like, if we're going to move forward, orthodoxies of all those things have changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's any reason to believe that they're all done now. And there's no need to change anything anymore. I think we need to keep changing and growing.
We haven't figured out all the things
right.
on
So
the planet.
The idea of post-orthodoxy is to maybe look what is waiting in the wings, things that might be coming up that we should be not only paying attention to, but fostering in the world to help get us wiggled out of some of these calcified systems that are making us have a worse time than we could be. So that's my motivation. You also have some kind of background that maybe gave you the motivation to be involved in this show.
Yes.
Maybe you can share with us what you think this show is or why you're doing it.
Well, so Post-Orthodoxy grew out of a conversation in a bar with Anna Nelson Shaw. We had just done an episode of Copacetic Conversations with Anna, who was very kindly willing to tell us about her experience growing up Mormon and the deconstruction that she'd been going through with herself in realizing the toxicity of her family and fellow church members, especially around a loved one of hers being gay and being ostracized and shut out and left behind and cut out of the church and the family. And for her, that didn't sit right. And it led not only to her standing up for this sibling eventually, but also in investigating how to help that gay loved one be included in Mormonism, she began to see a bunch of other flaws in her belief system.
Right.
And went out on her own and suffered ostracization. So that was an episode of Copacetic Conversations, which was a show that we started with Mokai Malope about having productive conversations around difficult subjects rather than just fighting each other. This was started during Trump's presidency when people were just getting really good at cutting people out of their lives rather than agreeing to disagree or having a conversation about why someone voted the way that they did.
And that seems to be progressing, actually.
It's getting worse.
Yes.
We're getting so polarized. People, the level of polarization and funneling that people are doing to themselves, they're just creating a tinier and tinier bubble where they're only ever interacting with people that agree exactly the same thing that they agree. So we went out for a drink with Anna after our show. And she and I were commiserating about how many people we run into in random places like an Instagram thread who are deconstructing from a extreme religious experience as a child.
A fundamentalism.
But that it's still not, religious trauma is still not listed in the DSM-5 as an actual psychological trauma or something that needs... It's not a mainstream, religious trauma is not recognized as a mainstream issue that people need support around. Right. And there aren't like we have, here's how to help someone with depression. Here's how to help someone with anxiety. We don't really have a codified mainstream. Here's how to help someone who's dealing with religious trauma.
Somebody who is trying to get out of a dangerous and unhealthy cult. And that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. And so I was like, Anna, wouldn't it be so much fun if a bunch of us deconstructing Christians and otherwise got together and had a show about getting out of religious brainwashing? Hashtag not all Christians.
Hashtag not all Christians. And so we've evolved it from the religious aspect because...
She moved out of town.
Well, she moved out of town, but then there's also this idea, because it...
May I continue?
Yeah, please,
Once
carry on.
I started once I started really filling my Instagram feed with people who were deconstructing, hashtag ex-evangelical, hashtag religious trauma, hashtag deconstructing, etc., I began, and Dark and I were having conversations around this. For him, his focus was really like, well, I'm more interested in political cultism than religious cultism, because for him that was way in the past. And for me, I'm just getting out of my religious cultism over the last 5 years. And so we're like, okay, religion and politics, those are really the big things. And then at one point we're like, well, but actually, there's this guy that is saying there's good evidence the pyramids were not built by Homo sapiens. And he's been cut out of his historical community for being post-Orthodox about history. And I'm like, well, and then actually there's these people that are talking about the water table and the geology, and they can't, and we just started seeing post-Orthodox issues everywhere where there's an established line of thinking that for some reason modern man thinks if this is the way it is, that's the way it is everywhere, and we don't need to keep wondering how it is. And then anybody that has a question or a challenge to the established way that it is in any subject is usually ostracized and cut out and shut down.
So much of our society is filled with orthodoxies that we accept as the one and only way. But if you look at something like the idea of the institution of marriage,
right,
where more than half of those things fail, there might be room for a post-Orthodox view of monogamy.
Obviously, the only healthy relationship for humans is a lifelong, committed, monogamous marriage between a man and a woman.
So there's orthodoxies all over the place that we just think that that's it. And there's no other way. And if there is another way, you're a bad person. That's the problem with orthodoxies. And for me, that's the crux of the show, is we're shaming a lot of people for doing things that I think are healthy, which is questioning dogmas.
Yes. Intellectual inquiry. And for me, really, it's anytime somebody says you can't ask a question about this thing, we don't question that thing.
We don't question it, no.
Then to me, it's like we should absolutely be questioning. That's toxicity to me.
Yeah.
Anything that's a no, like anything that we can't question, that's a toxicity. Not necessarily because the thing we're not supposed to question is not dangerous or challenging, but that anytime we just say, no, we're not going to address that, it doesn't mean it stops living in our environment.
Correct.
Yeah. So for me, post-Orthodoxy is about cognitive liberty, and having received a lot of help from people along the way who had learned how to become masters of their own minds, I want to continually foster an outpost in the Borderlands. Like if you're on the Oregon Trail and you're a trapper and you need some beef jerky and some hardtack and some new rope and some, thread for your stuff for your lantern stuff, that you can't make on the trail.
Mantles.
Yeah, mantles. Yeah. So thanks. Lantern thread. So things you can't make for yourself in the wilderness, you hope you run into a trading post on the way where someone has been like, I know these woods, I know the things that you're going to be able to find and not be able to find, and here are some of those things that will help you along your path. Take them if you need them.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've discovered in the course is that I discovered this from myself and from friends and family who think that, oh, well, we don't go to that church anymore, so I'm out of the cult.
Just because I stopped going to that place and reading those books.
I never liked it. My parents made me do it. Now I'm out. What I've discovered from my own journey and from journeys of people around me is that doesn't get you out of the cult. Just not going to the church and thinking that you're out. Mm-hmm. If you have been brainwashed, if you have been conditioned, if you grew up in it, then your entire processing mechanism of the world is going through those filters. And just saying, I don't agree with that anymore, does not change your processing system. It doesn't change your where things land in your brain of good or bad.
Yeah.
If you're stuck in a binary good and evil model, you can say you don't believe it anymore, but your system is set up to start processing the world in a binary way, good or bad, yes, no, right or wrong, versus depends, maybe, perhaps not there, but there. Doesn't mean is bad always, because bad here could be bad here, but not bad here. So
right. Cameron Cruson said, a lot of religious trauma is self-inflicted. And I said, how so? And I haven't heard back from him about that yet. But I'm really curious.
Yeah, I think
do
so.
you think a lot of religious trauma is self-inflicted?
Well, I think we have to define our terms.
Yeah, you have to
when
define
you say
self-inflicted.
When you say a lot. So I can only speak to my own experience. As a 4-year-old, I didn't get to decide whether or not I was a white supremacist or not.
Yeah.
I didn't get to decide that. I didn't get to decide whether I believed in God or not. That wasn't a choice as a 4-year-old.
And it wasn't like you were going to be a 16-year-old in your father's house and suddenly start standing up to him about how he treated people of other races.
No, in my background, if I start to question the orthodoxy, I am beaten, physically beaten.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a lot of choice.
Yeah. So I guess it was self-inflicted in that you kept perpetuating what you were given in order to stay alive.
I guess so. But
And
some people choose
Yeah.
to go to a religion. A lot of adults
Absolutely.
choose to go to a religion. But then we can explore what made that choice.
And is
Yeah.
them choosing to participate in a religion causing them religious trauma?
And is being in a religion a bad thing? There's a lot of great
Yeah,
religions. I know some wonderful Christians doing wonderful things.
Yes.
They're non-judgmental. If I had a problem, I know they'd be there for me.
We've had several of them on our show.
I have many, many friends that are Christians that I love dearly and I respect, and I have high regard for their perspectives. I got slipped a bad God, a bad version of Christianity.
At the party.
Had a bad trip.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that God is bad or your concept of God is bad. It means the one that was given to me was toxic, and I had a really bad time. So it's not all Christians. It's not all religion.
A lot of religious trauma is self-inflicted. I suppose, yes, I continually self-inflicted my traumatic religious experiences. I think a sentence such as a lot of religious trauma is self-inflicted is the same thing as saying like that someone who's been kidnapped going along with what their captor wants is inflicting their own torture on themselves. Like if your captor says you have to stay in this closet until I come give you food, or I will not give you food, you're going to stay in the closet. So are you self-inflicting your own confinement?
No, that's called being a prisoner.
Yeah. So I think it's important, especially for people who did not grow up being told how they were supposed to believe about the world.
They didn't get to make the choice.
To remember that what we're talking about with these kinds of cultish upbringings that a lot of people have had is a prison-like state where you are choosing. I was choosing to continually torture myself for wanting to have sex as a teen. I was choosing to divorce my mind from my body and disallow myself from having any natural desires. I was choosing to wear clothing that would not tempt my weaker brothers rather than clothing that was comfortable or clothing that I liked. So I was self-inflicting my religious trauma, but I did it because otherwise I would not be loved.
Or have a place to live. For me, I wouldn't have a place to live as a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
Or 8, 9, when I started going, this is crazy. This is a crazy thing that I'm involved in. I still kind of believe it, but I also, because I haven't been exposed to other belief systems, but I look around and see a lot happier people than my family. But we're the superior ones, and we're the only one true religion. So it's called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Cameron's asking a ton of questions, or he's asked a few questions, but do you want to try to answer those questions?
Is there a tipping point? Would you describe the notion that Elvis is still alive as post-orthodoxy? I mean, yes. There's an orthodox view that Elvis, Michael Jackson, Robin Williams, Bowie are dead. Because we all saw it on the news.
Yeah.
And we read the coroner's reports.
Right.
And now we don't see them anymore.
There's another theory that they all live on an island and they're rocking out somewhere.
I just saw someone post footage of photographs of Michael Jackson getting out of his own coroner's van in a hotel parking lot. So, like, I can assume that that's fake because I've already decided to believe that Michael Jackson died. But if I had seen that first, I might assume that the story that he died is fake.
So I think I have a feeling the direction he's going to go in with this line of questioning is that's disinformation. Then if somebody spreads information that something's not true, it's a post-Orthodox perspective. It doesn't mean it's a true perspective.
No. We're
not saying that because we're questioning the actual dogma, we have to trade it for another dogma.
No.
That's not what we're saying.
We're going from a place of a locked down belief where nothing is true except this story to a place where we're not claiming to know 100% what is true about anything. I mean, is there anything that I can know 100%? I can know things about my physical body. 100% I can know things about my physical body.
Okay.
What hurts me, what makes me hungry, what makes me feel safe, things that my body likes, things that my body does not like, how my body is built. You know, like, y'all don't know if I have a dick or not. Like, I know that, but you don't know. So, like, you can guess, but you don't know.
Starting rumors here.
You know, I'm just saying, like we really need to get serious about what do we actually know. Because
there's a difference between knowledge and belief, and it's really profound.
Wow. And if someone has told you something, you still don't know it unless you have experienced that information yourself firsthand.
A belief is defined as, the dictionary keeps changing, but belief, as I understood it, was accepting something as true on someone else's authority.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you know it.
Yeah.
That means that you trust your sources and you believe that is true.
Most of the things that I would say, I know, are actually things that I believe.
Things that you know are things that you have direct knowledge of.
I
have
know.
Experienced that. Like,
I know that.
I believe France exists.
Yes.
But I don't know because I've never been to France.
I do know that France exists because I have been there.
Well, I landed at the airport, but it could have all been a set. I don't know. I didn't actually get to go explore France. So I don't know France exists, but I believe France exists.
I ate cheese on the side of a canal in France.
See, so you know.
So I actually know France exists.
So I believe it exists because you told me so, and I trust you.
But you still don't know.
But I still don't know for myself.
Yeah.
Until I've gone and eaten cheese and like went and knocked on the Eiffel Tower or whatever. You know?
Licked it.
Yeah.
So
I want to move into. I want you to
my theorem.
Continue on, but I want you to move because it's not just about getting out. This is the point that I was trying to make. It's not just like, I want to get out of this closed, oppressive, limiting system and find something else. And what I found with a lot of people who get out of strongly held belief systems is they leap into another strongly held belief system. And you've come up with some nice. You call it a theorem?
Yeah, theorem, yes. I looked up the correct word.
Postulates around the terrain. Like, what's the tipping point, he asked. What is the tipping point? Like, when you're in a orthodoxy.
I feel as though Cameron was saying, is there a tipping point where, much like that psychedelic pioneer that you like with the high-pitched voice.
Terence McKenna?
Yeah, much like Terence McKenna says, he's like, Terence McKenna does not believe that it is valuable to entertain all perspectives. So I personally believe, out of my own experience and research, that heterosexual monogamy is not the only healthy relationship style on planet Earth. However,
other people have demonstrated that. Yeah.
And I entertain and discuss and research a lot of different relationship styles for humans, consenting adult humans.
Right.
I also know of people who believe that they are married to a ghost.
Yeah. You know those people?
I've heard several stories over the years.
You believe them then? You believe those stories?
I've heard stories of people who believe that they are married to a ghost. That is a post-Orthodox relationship style.
That for certain.
Do we need to talk about that relationship style and try to advocate for its mainstream acceptance?
Yeah.
The same way we might want to advocate for gay marriage or a relationship with more than one person.
I would take a libertarian stance on that and say, you go.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I'm not going to the courthouse to try to get it ratified for you. Sorry.
Is marriage to a ghost hurting anybody?
Yeah. It's hurting the sanctity of marriage. All right. I want you to go to your theorem.
Yes. Okay, somebody with a Russian name just wrote something in Russian. So
Okay, I'll translate it while you're doing that.
Copy and paste that shit into Google Translate.
See translation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, we're broadcasting in St. Petersburg, Russia at 9:33 p.m. I don't know if this person is in St. Petersburg, Russia, and I don't know how to say their name. Oscar, maybe?
I don't know either.
What's the upside down U?
I
don't know. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you from Russia person.
That's super cool.
So let's talk about our theorem.
All right. So my theorem. So this rapidly developed as I began. Like, I left the church. I stopped going to evangelical churches. I stopped reading my Bible. I stopped praying. I stopped doing devotions. I just put all of that up on the shelf. Like, I'd done a lot of it. And I felt full up. And then I just started working on some other things. Like, is it okay to say fuck? Is it okay to watch an R-rated movie?
Yeah, will I go to hell if that happens? What happens if I do it?
Is it okay to walk around my own house naked? Is it okay to kiss a girl in a bar?
Right.
Like, I was working on some basic level shit.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't even really say shit either.
Yeah.
And then Dark and I started copacetic conversations with Mokai, and those conversations were amazing. They covered a wide variety, usually political and religious things, because that's what most people fight over all the time. And then we started Post-Orthodoxy, and I was like, I'm going to go look back at why did I leave? Because at the time we started Post-Orthodoxy back in 2018, I was in a very tortured place where my family was not speaking to me because I stopped going to church and because I got a divorce.
Right.
And those two things for them made me untrustworthy. They didn't know me. I was a bad influence.
Corrupted.
I had turned my back on what I knew was right.
According to them.
Yes, which is their reality.
Absolutely.
So I was like, okay, but why? Like, I really believed that shit. I really believed it.
Yeah.
It was I lived and breathed evangelical Christianity. And so I was like, what? How did I get out? Why did I decide to leave when I got married? I mean, when I got divorced? And it was like, no, getting divorced was just sort of like permission to stop doing the thing. I had for a while, I'd realized for a while I had been doing the Christian thing, in order to stay loved. I hadn't felt the need personally to do the Christian thing for a while, so I had to look back further. Like, when did I stop personally feeling the need to do evangelical Christianity and just sort of started doing it because it was the right thing to do? Because that's a horrible reason to have a belief system.
Right.
I'm going to have this entire perspective on reality and behavior style because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm personally convicted.
Not because you know it's the thing to do.
Exactly.
Right.
So I was like, when did I stop being personally convicted that this was reality and the best thing for me? And I went all the way back to when I first attended my first college experience when I had just turned 17. I went and did a year at Southern Illinois University. I was still driving home every night, but it was the first time, especially because I think I only had a flip phone at that time. It was the first time I was out of the house. My mom did not know what I was doing all day. She didn't know who I was talking to. It was the first time my mom did not know everything about my life. And so I was having a personal experience for the first time, an experience that only Ainsley knew about for the first time in my life at 17.
She was homeschooled, by the way, so she only knew really the people in her church and the people in her family.
Yeah, 24/7.
So that's cult level experience of growing up.
So I went to SIU, and I remember I made some friends, did band, did choir, took other classes, had things I needed to do that only I knew I needed to do. Like, my mom wasn't like, hey, make sure you do all the things you need to do. I had to remember. It was amazing. I was in control of my well-being and my progress.
How exciting.
Oh, God. And then I was sitting outside eating lunch one day, and my friend Jesse came up to me, and he was obviously really emotional, and he was like, I just really need a hug. And for one thing, whoa, because boys hugging girls is sexually inappropriate and suggestive. And so he came up, and I was like, okay, yes. And I'm hugging him, and he just starts bawling on my shoulder. I'm like, what is going on? And he's like, I think my boyfriend is breaking up with me. And I think something just sort of broke in my heart in that moment, because up to that point, my experience of the entire world and everyone in it was that homosexuality is wrong. It's sinful, it's dangerous, it's unhealthy, it's unnatural, and it's something that you choose to do even though you know it's not healthy for you or right.
That's the Orthodox perspective.
That's the Orthodox, evangelical, Reformed Christian perspective on homosexuality. Right. And then I had this age mate crying in my arms, heartbroken, and I perceived on an animal level that he was heartbroken because his boyfriend was breaking up with him. And it hit all the markers in my psyche of if a girl had come up to me and said, I think my boyfriend is breaking up with me.
Right.
In a primal way that instantly took precedence over all of my intellectual knowledge that homosexuality was a choice and an unnatural one and a sinful one. This kid loved his boyfriend.
Obviously.
It was real. And he was really sad.
Yeah.
So it really was the gaze that helped me.
So what would you call that moment?
That was the introduction of reasonable doubt. Up to that moment, I hadn't had a reason other than my own sexual frustrations, which was normal. Everybody experiences sexual frustrations when they're trying to keep their hearts pure for Jesus and their husbands. So other than my own sexual frustration, I hadn't experienced anything that jarred my sense of this is the way until that moment when Jesse was crying on my shoulder.
Wow, you got sideswiped.
Yeah, I was like, oh, my heart just like jogged to the left a little bit and never went back.
So I think it's important to dwell on that term because
the introduction of reasonable doubt.
The introduction of reasonable doubt.
So
how
legally,
does somebody get out of a cult?
Yeah.
First.
You're not, first of all,
introduction
if you're
of
in
reasonable doubt.
If you're in a bubble, if you're in a reality bubble, you may or may not know that you're in a reality bubble.
Correct.
In fact, I would err on the side of saying that most people who are in these cult-like mindsets don't know that they have cult-like mindset until this moment of introduction of reasonable doubt, which usually happens early in life.
Right.
Because these sorts of extreme bubbles are formed by your parents and your environment when you don't have control over your environment.
There's that, but there's also like Blue No Matter Who and MAGA that are cult-like in the way that they present themselves in the world, in the way that people speak about those experiences.
People often become cult-like.
And they may have chosen those.
And oftentimes I think people become cult-like as a trauma response. If something's going badly, we have a tendency to try to figure out what is true, what is safe, and then stick with it in order to help ourselves feel better. So I think you can have midlife cult-like indoctrination that you may or may not have done to yourself.
Right.
So for this case of growing up in an extreme mindset, and then there's an introduction of reasonable doubt. And that at that moment, you can never go back to the purity that you were in before, where you believed that the way that you see and perceive reality is the way that all of reality is for everyone.
So at that point, you would have had to make a choice of doubling down on your belief system and doubting your heart.
Yeah.
Or listen to your heart and try to figure out what that experience was and what does it mean. So what'd you do?
It was a long process. I didn't end up, quote unquote, leaving the church until 10 years later.
Mm-hmm. But that was the moment of reasonable doubt that started the seed, that started the doubt that maybe this is not the best thing ever.
Maybe this is not the best thing or the only thing.
Right. Which was told was the only thing.
Only thing.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't matter if it's best, if it's the only. Everything else is bad and you don't need to consider it.
It doesn't matter if it's best for me as long as it's right for me.
Correct.
A lot of religious groups, especially the cultish ones, break apart what's right for you and what's best for you and put them in different categories.
Right.
So something may feel like it's the best thing, but it might not be right for you. And you can't know. You just have to follow the rules. So the theorem is there's a belief system, a cult, a reality bubble. And then there's the moment of introduction of reasonable doubt, which in a legal sense, in a court case, you can win a case by introducing reasonable doubt.
Yes.
If you don't have to prove that the supposed murderer was somewhere else, you can just introduce doubt that he was at the murder scene.
Yes. And then you can't convict.
Strokes. You can't convict
wholeheartedly.
Right.
Right.
If there's reasonable doubt, And so reasonable doubt is this little drip of water, this little tiny crack in the facade that starts letting the sand get in, you know?
That can be the difference between taking a new path and getting out of a belief system, which also could mean being excommunicated from your tribe, which puts a lot of weight on that choice.
Yes.
It's not something you make a snap decision, or if you do make the snap decision, often the repercussions of that can be brutal. If you're in a tight-knit group that is invested in the orthodoxy that you have decided maybe isn't all in everything.
So there's your belief system, your reality bubble, you're tra-la-la trolling along thinking this is the way that everything is for everybody, obviously. And then there's the moment where you have a personal experience, or you experience a piece of irrefutable information. It could be very small, that it's like, oh shit, it might not actually be this way for everyone everywhere.
Right.
And then you have a choice. You can either double down on your beliefs for comfort, for safety, out of laziness, in order to keep being loved by your parents, in order to keep being loved by your team, in order to keep being loved by your town, whatever it is.
Or you develop a secret life.
Or you develop a literal psychosis with yourself.
Yeah.
Where now, instead of talking with your spouse and your children about your sexual preferences, you just start banging somebody else on the side, or wearing clothing in the closet that you hope your wife never finds.
Right.
So like that's the psychotic place that a lot of people go to when they experience reasonable doubt, is I can't do anything about it, but I also can't ignore it. So I'm just going to be two people.
Which may not be the healthiest route.
Often isn't.
Yeah.
Or you can put on your safari hat and like settle down into your boots on the planet and decide that you're going to see what is really going on.
And that has risks.
It does have a lot of risks.
So what happens after the introduction of reasonable doubt?
Well, reasonable doubt, and then you either double down or you decide to go exploring.
Crossroads.
A lot of people, when they decide to go exploring, they're like, well, if that was wrong, then I need to go find what's right. So they're not leaving binary thinking.
Right.
They're just saying, oh, something is right and something is wrong. This is what I've been told my whole life. So if the thing that I thought was right is actually not right, then I have to go find the thing that is actually right.
Yes.
And so they just jump from one belief system or reality bubble to another belief system. Or I go directly from Christianity to atheism. Fuck all gods.
Exactly. That's what I've noticed in a lot of people. Like, I was on Reddit for a long time, and the atheists, what I saw about the atheists on Reddit, tended to talk about religion and God more than a lot of Christians that I know.
It's very interesting.
And I think there was a relishing in playing the role of the devil to Christians, which was tormenting Christians
and
for being stuck in their stupid belief system. So they actually take on the role of the devil.
Yeah. They're still completely in that belief system.
And claim to be an atheist.
It's crazy.
Yeah, because they flipped, but they never got out.
When you go from one strongly held belief system immediately into another strongly held belief system out of rejection of the first one, your life is still defined by that original belief system. And you are still not experiencing cognitive liberty. Cameron Cruson has posted a lot of things. He said, wait, what? And I'm curious.
I don't know what that means.
Right, it was a while ago, and I appreciate it. Yes.
If you're commenting, because there's a 7-second lag between our timeline that we're in and the timeline that you're in.
And we don't always have time to get to your comment right away.
If you're going to ask questions, it would help to contextualize the questions so that when we go back to it, we can respond to your question.
Yeah, let me say this again. Cameron, you mean the argument that being Christian is being nice because you're helping people type right as opposed to actually true? I want to take a guess that Cameron did not grow up Christian and therefore has had or has always had the perspective of Christianity as just some belief system that's out there. Right. And has never had the experience, and I don't know this.
There's a lot of different kinds of Christians. There are people who grew up Christian that don't believe any of it, that never got indoctrinated deeply. They just went to church as well.
I'm just wondering if Cameron has never had the experience of understanding that to Christians, that is reality.
Yeah.
They don't feel as though they're picking a belief system the way that I choose to practice Buddhism for a while.
That's why we call it a cult.
Yeah.
The stuff that we were
Many
given.
Christians do feel as though that perspective on reality, Noah's Ark, Jesus Christ, the second coming, is reality.
6,000-year-old Earth is reality.
Yeah. And
that's not a choice.
It's not something you choose. It's you knowing and believing and participating in the truth, or you rejecting the truth and going to hell forever.
And I know that's really, really hard for people to get their heads wrapped around.
Like, I go shopping with people like that.
That were not involved in something like that. We were indoctrinated into that, so I want to get to that thing, but we're going to go through this thing first.
Yeah.
And I appreciate people having questions and comments and getting involved.
This is great.
I really appreciate this. We can ask.
What is the thing that you want to get to?
I want to get to the thing that I've been promoting about the show, which is that video, the video about the guy talking about mob psychology.
Oh God, it's so good.
And
it's very good. Yeah.
As related to why we're doing this show and why I think it's important right now.
Well, let's wrap up a little bit more of these comments and
questions,
then
and I want to finish. I want to finish the rest of your theorem.
Right. So you start. I think we did it. You start in a reality. You start in a reality bubble.
Yeah.
Not everybody did. Some people grew up with families and communities that encouraged free expression,
agnosticism,
cognitive liberty, exploring,
critical thought.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having your own opinions about things.
And if you were raised that way, it's going to be really hard for you to even get your head wrapped around what it's like to have a mono reality as your reality bubble.
Yeah.
It's really hard to understand from people who've never been there.
Yes, it is. And that's not a judgment. That's not a judgment at all. It's just factual. If you never policed your own mind and experiences for the sake of a greater reality, then it's hard to understand what that psyche is like.
Yeah, it's complicated.
I imprisoned myself. Cameron's right.
Well, you were indoctrinated. So you didn't have the choice to do that.
I did not have the choice, but I was trained to be my own jailer.
Yeah, and like when you say you have choice, when you're a 3-year-old in a mono reality, you don't know what the options are, so you're not really making a choice.
And when you're a 16-year-old that is homeschooled, so you're home 24/7, you don't have any social that is not supervised by a parent or church member, you also don't have choice.
There's the whole idea that you can only be held responsible for what you know. Right?
Yeah.
And this is the problem with
I think it'd be nice to get back to some of that.
The introduction of reasonable doubt. Because, like, if you do something and you didn't know it was wrong, are you really liable?
Yeah.
If you didn't know it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you know it's wrong, once we know you know, now you're responsible for your actions.
Right.
But if you didn't know before, how can you be responsible for those actions if you didn't know that?
Yeah.
Right? This is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So this is your theorem.
So
this is about the terrain of leaving a reality bubble. Mm-hmm. And then, as you were going to say.
And then what do you do? So
when you get out, what do you do?
You think, you're tra-la-la, I think all of reality is this way. I've been told it's this way. I have no reason to doubt it. And that's just how it is for everybody. And people who are in denial of reality are either crazy or haters, or going to hell, or whatever it is,
Right.
And then you stumble upon a piece of reasonable doubt in the road, and you either have to start spending energy to pretend you don't know that.
You have to, deflect, and then you have
for
to
the rest of your life.
Rationalize, yeah.
Or you're like, this may break down everything that I think is real, but I would rather know than not know.
That's the hero's journey.
I would rather know than be safe.
Right.
I would rather know than feel safe, because once you get out, you start realizing that safety is this weird concept, right? So like you're told you have to believe these things to be safe.
I can give a really encapsulated because of the cult that I was raised in, and this wasn't necessarily the cult. This was actually just 1970s, 80s America, the drug war. So I was told by the drug war that drugs are bad. Anybody who does drugs,
is a bad person,
are bad.
Yeah,
right. And that's a very black and white. So there's no reason.
Just swallow that. That's easy.
Right. You smoke pot, you do heroin, same thing. I don't care. It's bad.
It's bad.
Right. That was my belief system. And then I ended up delivering pizzas at a pizza place in Boulder, Colorado, that was a money laundering operation for a mob family that was managed by a gun runner, and everybody was dealing drugs out of the pizza restaurant. Suddenly, I'm hanging out with the bad people
who are doing drugs.
And I was having a much better time. And then I switched sides in the drug war. And then it was a long journey of understanding what that meant.
Your introduction of reasonable doubt was that people who do drugs are not actually just all bad people.
And drugs are not just bad things.
Yes.
Drugs can have negative consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs can have positive consequences. That was not told to me, and I was angry and I was pissed because I'd been lied to. I've been lied to by my family, my school. The president of the United States had lied to me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, that was like, what the fuck?
Excuse fucking me.
There was no internet. I couldn't go like, what the fuck is going on with this? I had to go to like University of Colorado library and dig up books that
about
were like
court cases.
That were like debates between pro and anti-drug advocates in 1957. And then I would read those books and go, holy shit, we got sold up the river by a bunch of fucking fear-based. That was my flip, like my hard flip. I knew that the cult was bad, and I knew that
you just
the whole
figured you
racist
left
shit
it.
was terrible. But like I knew it. But then when that thing happened, I was like, this is concrete. They lied to me. I know they fucking lied to me. I've done drugs now, and I know that they were not what they told me they were. And I was a zealot.
Yeah.
I had flipped.
Yeah.
Literally, the drug war, I walked across the line and said, fuck you guys.
Yeah.
So that was my introduction of reasonable doubt, was like, these people are not what I was told. This experience is not what I was told.
And knowing what I know about your story, I can reach back into the past and point out for our gentle audience that in Dark's case, when the reasonable doubt came, he was already fucking alone.
Yeah, I didn't.
And so
have
there
to
were
I wasn't
no
losing.
consequences to accepting the reasonable doubt and changing his mind.
Right.
Because he already didn't have any loved ones.
I walked away from everybody and was basically on a suicide run. I was just like, I'm just going to go live hard and fast until I die because I can't commit suicide because Christianity.
Yeah. So
there's a clause that I was exploiting. Yeah.
Right. So you start spending energy to ignore the reasonable doubt in your belief system, or you enter into a phase of cognitive dissonance, which Cameron also mentioned, where you just sort of do it sometimes but not other times, or you decide I would rather know than feel safe, and you start learning things. And for some people that just means I'm going to learn whatever is the opposite of the thing I knew already, because if this thing I knew already is wrong, then the opposite of that thing must be right, because you're still in a binary mindset. And then for some people, you can actually begin expanding beyond the binary mindset and realize that there are multiple belief systems and multiple perspectives on the universe, much like not everybody sees color the same way. Not everybody hears sound the same way. Not everybody experiences spicy foods the same way. I think that they're annoying. Dark loves them, and my ex-boyfriend experiences them as pain in his throat, like pain, like slicing pain. So like people experience the same things differently in every instance of life, in every instance of life. Everybody experiences things differently. And if you have the energy and the time, it's very fascinating to just become a complete explorer of the borderlands of belief systems and not have to own any of them, but be free to experience all of them and begin to develop your own moral compass, your own ethics, your own identity, and your own personal experience in the universe.
That's a hard one.
Phew.
So Cameron Cruson asks, is this episode about mass formation or what?
Yes.
So if you haven't watched the show before, we tend to do a lot of zoom out, zoom in. This is also a reintroduction of the show. We will get to the sort of content that we mentioned before in a moment.
Do we have
This is a which one do we like?
I don't know.
No. Yeah.
Here. We're going to do real tags where like the screen blanks out.
We're going to have the thing where we can
one.
actually put up the cards.
Yeah.
We don't have those right now.
This is the...
We're looking for a production assistant. You don't actually have to be in Butte, America because of the world that we live in. So if you would like to help with production with the show, please message us. So I wrote a little piece. I'm going to post it in the comment thread here on Facebook and on YouTube. You can find it. You can just go to darksevier.substack. And it's very easy to find. What happened to my current? There's our live video. So in doing prep for the show, I really wanted to, I don't know. Can you post that into the YouTube comments? You're much better at split focus.
Yeah, you talk, I'll do.
All right, so I wrote a piece called Natural Immunity from Bullshit, pre-show notes. It's on Substack. And
Cameron said he watched a good chunk of that video and made notes as well.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. That's really great. Thanks for participating in the show.
This is why we share our stuff with you guys.
So this is a video. You can find the video in that article. I don't know how to. I guess we could just share the video by itself, but
I will.
This is from a podcast called the Pandemic Podcast.
Okay.
Which I assume only came about
recently
after March of 2020.
Right.
It's an interview with a guy named Matthias Desmet.
Is the interviewer or the interviewee?
No, So this get to the show. The show. Dan Aston Gregory. He has a hyphenated name. Dan Aston Gregory, the Pandemic Podcast. His guest is Matthias Desmet, who's a psychiatrist and statistician on the topic of mass formation. People in this country might know it as more like mob psychology is another way to say mass formation. I think the video is interesting. It's a different perspective. Trying to understand... I don't know anybody whose lives have not been turned upside down since March 2020. There's been a lot of upheaval socially, culturally, in families, politically, like economically. There's been a lot of upheaval. So in order to understand what's going on, I've been looking at it through the lens of epidemiology, through the lens of psychology, through the lens of economics, through the lens of politics. And those are all very different stories of where we are and how we got here. There are through lines, but they're very, very different narratives of who we are and what we're doing right now. If you're looking at it through a psychological lens and you're trying to figure out how we are dealing with this unprecedented upheaval, that doesn't have anything to do with the virus itself. It has to do with social conditions and shifts in the social conditions.
And general Homo sapien psychology.
Right. So, this guy, in the very beginning, the first 5 minutes of the video, he talks about his moment of reasonable doubt of where he thought, okay, this pandemic thing could get bad. I'm going to go pay off the mortgage of my house. I'm going to buy some things and prepare to hunker down. This could be really bad. So he did that. And then he started paying attention. And he was ahead of the curve. He was actually paying attention to what was going on in December of 2019. So he's like, okay, we have this pandemic. It's coming. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody cares about it. But I'm gonna act because this looks like it could be really bad.
Yeah.
So there were two different models that came out in the beginning of 2020. Two different models, we can just call it two different perspectives of
what might be happening.
The implications of this unknown virus might be.
Yes. Because there was a time when we didn't know how it was going to behave. Unlike now, when we do know how it behaves.
We have data, yeah. So at that time, we didn't have data. So we're like, there's people who are acting in different ways. Some people are like, lock it down, take care of your family, buy some bullets. There were all kinds of different reactions. There were two models that have stood out over time. Two people who were modeling the virus that stood out to me over time. One of them, and also to this guy. One of them is this guy named Neil Ferguson. Neil Ferguson, what was his story? Neil Ferguson was from the Royal Imperial College of London, or the Imperial College of London. Hold on, I got this written down somewhere.
Yes.
Oh, right. Neil Ferguson is a mathematical epidemiologist at Imperial College of London.
Mathematical epidemiologist.
So he likes numbers.
And epidemiology.
And epidemiology, yes. Epidemi. Okay, so his perspective was he made a model that predicted, for instance, for Sweden, because this is now in like April, May that this is happening. He made a model and he warned Sweden. He said 80,000 people will be dead by the end of May 2020 if in Sweden.
80,000 Swedes.
if they don't institute all the lockdown policies that they were having in London.
Yeah, shut it down.
Sweden said no thanks. So
Sweden implemented a variety of multi-focus approaches for various different demographics.
They recommended social distancing, but they didn't shut down businesses. They didn't shut down industry. They didn't shut down schools.
And they had daily press conferences for the people for them to know as much data as the scientists and healthcare professionals knew.
Right. So that was their approach. So by the end of May 2020, 6,000 people had died in Sweden.
Okay. Not 80,000.
Not 80,000.
Okay.
So according to my friend, this guy who does this interview, he says that's a model overestimated mortality by a factor of 15. That's a lot. That's a big overestimation.
That's a big.
Right? So his recommendations were we do all this stuff to save people, and that's a noble motivation.
Yeah.
Right. You want to err on the side of caution.
Yes,
err on the side of caution.
Absolutely.
So we started looking at Sweden around the same time, and we had a friend of ours from Sweden, Astrid.
Shout out to Astrid, thank you.
Who was participating in our videos and telling us what was going on over there. And we're like, okay, well, I guess Sweden is the control. We're going to find out because America locked down, everybody locked down. And then Sweden's like, yeah, no thanks.
We're going to do a different approach. They didn't just say, no, we're going to pretend the pandemic doesn't exist. They just said, I don't think that just shutting everything, like Sweden was saying, if we shut everything down, there's going to be so many other
unintended consequences,
destitutional effects if we just shut the country down.
Right.
And they're looking at it, the virology of it, and they're like, I don't think that it's going to, what do you say? It's going to count that. I don't think it'll be worth it. I don't think it will justify.
It won't justify.
They're like, Sweden said, we don't think this level of lockdown is justified by the deadliness of the disease.
Well, it was the same thing with the WHO. The WHO said, well, the rich countries can lock down and then they have some savings to sit on, but this is going to have massive effect on the poor.
Yeah.
And the lockdown measures is going to affect the poor in profoundly more serious terms.
Yeah.
And the lockdown measures will probably end up killing more people.
Yeah.
And this is not going to be something that happens in 1 week and you can look at the death count. This is going to be long, rippling as, what's that guy? The guy from Peak Prosperity. He said,
Chris Martinson.
The pig is going to move slowly through the python.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to be slow, and it's going to be a long time before we play out the numbers of really what happened. But it seemed that
people were predicting even back then.
Ferguson's model was the model that set in motion most of the Western world's reaction to this virus, and it overestimated mortality by a factor of 15.
That's a lot.
So that means that if his initial thing was 80,000 dead, maybe it's worth shutting down the country. Maybe it's worth trying to get a handle on it. Maybe it's worth, but it didn't.
Yeah.
But we didn't change our tack.
So
the effects of the lockdowns, the effects of these measures, the effects of the propaganda, and we know it's propaganda. And to pretend it's not propaganda, you can look up the panic paper out of Germany. There's a similar paper in London where the government said people are not behaving, they're not taking it seriously enough. One, because it wasn't as serious as the models said. They said, well, they're not taking it as serious as our bad models, so we must scare people into compliance. So they doubled down. Rather than taking the new information, they doubled down and said, we have to frighten people into compliance. That's not good parenting by the government. If our government is our parent, if the government is supposed to be taking care of us, so many people on the left think, that's bad parenting.
Yeah.
Our government has lied to us over and over. London lied over and over. Germany lied over and over. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's documented, and we can have that conversation later.
Yeah.
But Fauci, there's an interview from 2019 where somebody says, what happens if a deadly virus comes? What do we do? Do we just wear masks? And he's like, don't wear a mask. Eat good food. Get good sleep. Take care of yourself. Get some exercise.
Vitamins.
Get your vitamins, right?
Yeah.
Everything he said don't do like 6 months later. So that's not science. That's politics, unfortunately. So that was one model.
Right.
Here's a bad model It's been proven to be bad in May of 2020, and we just doubled down on it because it's become the dogma. It's become the orthodox approach, even though it's bad and we know it's bad. The
belief system, the mainstream belief system is still that SARS-CoV-2 is deadly and can get you for no reason and you're not safe, even though we've known since last May.
Risk. We know who's at risk. We know where the comorbidities are. Right now, we're trying to get 12-year-olds vaccines when how many people died from the coronavirus that were under 18 in the U.S.?
Oh my gosh, I don't have that number right now.
400. 400, and none of them.
I'm not laughing about those children dying.
None of them were without multiple comorbidities.
Childhood diabetes, obesity, heart problems, cancer.
There were 0 healthy children contracted coronavirus and died.
Yeah.
Because they're not at risk. They're not at significant risk of damage. And now we're going to vaccinate those kids? There's no logic for it. It's based on this 80,000 model.
Yeah.
This is a problem. And this is the problem with orthodoxies. So that was one model. There's another guy, John, and this is just going to get me in trouble for saying his name. John Ioannidis, which I said it probably wrong.
So live dangerously.
Maybe the algorithm won't pick it up. And he wrote a paper that said, oh, geez.
What?
I got to plug in my computer.
I got you.
He's
it's not plugged in?
Well, it's not working. Maybe it's anyway, it's going to die soon.
I'll switch it.
He said, basically, we don't know what's going on. There could be 1,000 people that die from this, or there could be 1 billion people that die from this. We don't know, and so we should be having conversations and not just rushing into a lockdown. We should not be setting standards on something that we should not be enacting policy off of models that are not based in reality, which seems like a logical thing to do. Now, if you look up this guy's name, he's like he's like flypaper for like Facebook Corona fact check things. Right. But there's early on in the beginning of 2020, there was an article that was written by this cat who, let me find that article. This is a guy who, let me find it down here. Yeah, so this is another approach. This guy says that, geez, where is it?
So you're saying beginning of 2020, right, when global powers were first realizing that there was a new virus.
Yeah.
Or they say they were first
novel
realizing.
Virus. They knew before
late
that.
2019, early 2020, and 2 big players came out with theories as to what might happen.
Right. Well, this guy, Ioannidis, stuck his neck out and was thoroughly lambasted for going against the already orthodoxy that was going on.
We'll get to why people latched on to the original theories so quickly.
There's an article from Jeffrey Flyer that was written early in the early part of 2020, I think April or June or something like that. He's the former dean of Harvard Medical School. Now, he's not just some schmuck. This is a guy who's the dean of the medical school. You would think he has some kind of credential, right? And he wrote this article that said, scientists who express different views on COVID-19 should be heard. Not demonized. And I'm going to read a couple of quick
Especially at
things.
the beginning, when we purportedly did not know how it was going to behave.
Yes. So
we should have been looking at multiple models.
Here's a couple of quick quotes from that article. He says, at the same time, we're concerned by a chilling attitude among some scholars and academics who are wrongly ascribing legitimate disagreements about COVID-19 to ignorance or to questionable political or other motivations. A case in point involves the response to John Ioannidis, a professor of medicine at Stanford University, also not a schmuck, who was thrust into the spotlight after writing a provocative article in Stat on COVID-19. He argued in mid-March that we didn't have enough information on the prevalence of COVID-19 and the consequences of the infection on a population basis to justify the most extreme lockdown measures, which he hypothesized could have dangerous consequences of their own. Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
He says, we are 2 academic physicians with different career interests who sometimes disagree on substantive issues. But we share the view that vigorous debate is fundamental to the existence of universities where individuals with different ideas who have a commitment to reason compete to persuade others based on evidence, data, and reason. Now is the time to foster, not stifle, open dialogue among academic physicians, scientists about the current pandemic and best tactical responses to it, each of which involve enormous trade-offs and unanticipated consequences. He was the canary in the coal mine. Mm-hmm. People realized, I have a different point of view than the Orthodox as well, but I don't want to spend all day defending myself on Twitter and possibly getting fired from my job at my university.
Yeah.
So when people say, all the scientists agree, put that into context with the threat that people felt for going up against an Orthodox perspective.
Even already over a year ago, it was already a threat.
Very much a threat. And this is the guy and so that guy has been somebody who he's still alive. He's still at Stanford. He still writes. Stanford hasn't fired him. Stanford has actually protected a few people who have had post-Orthodox views, and not all of those people have been correct 100% of the time. However, they have provided insight for me that helped me question the official narrative, and that questioning, I think, has kept me safe from some of the bullshit that has gone on. And this is the thing that I think I'm very happy about. It came together. It's very poetic.
Little choice metaphor.
What we're doing with this show is we contracted a virus of being brainwashed.
As children.
As children.
Dark and I.
We have natural immunity to bullshit because we got outside of a very, very toxic bullshit situation. And now, because of our natural immunity, it's easier to recognize bullshit because we've been through it, not just living in it. People who live in bullshit don't know it's bullshit or they wouldn't be living in it.
Yeah.
Our bullshit was extreme. A lot of other people's bullshit isn't as extreme as ours, so the motivation is the frog in the pot of water. The motivation isn't as strong to get out of it.
A lot of other people's bullshit looks like a lot of other people's bullshit. And so they're like, well, everybody has this experience, so I guess it's normal.
And it's not true. So this...
And just because everybody's having a shitty experience doesn't mean it should be normal. I'm
going to get through the 4 basic ideas of this mass formation, which I think is a really important thing to look at, whether you agree with it or not. It's science. When people say, trust the science, I would say, please don't say that anymore. 1, don't say the science, because science is not a thing. Science is a process. Science is a question. So if you're going to say, then trust the question. Trust the process. When you say trust the science, you've turned the opposite of religion, which is faith-based, into a religion which is faith-based. You're making science faith-based when you say trust the authorities, trust the science. That is so unscientific.
Yeah. The point of science is learning and exploring.
Yes. So this is a scientist. Maybe he's not an epidemiologist, but he's a scientist. Statistician.
Oh, look at his. Yeah, he's got specs.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this guy again. Matthias Desmond. He is an epidemiologist. No, that's John. He's a mathematical epidemiologist. No, that's Neil. He's a psychiatrist and statistician and a professor. Yeah.
Yeah, doctorate of clinical psychology.
He has a split, clinical psychology and statistics.
Okay. So he's talking about a Homo sapien phenomenon which happens and has happened.
Has happened.
It has happened.
People were really interested in this stuff, especially after World War II. Like, how could mass groups of people commit atrocities?
Become Nazis.
Does that make them evil people?
Yeah.
Like just the regular household Nazis?
Were they all bad?
Would you look at them and hang out with them in 1941 and have dinner with them and think, oh, these guys are fascist? No. But they were a part of a fascist movement.
Yeah.
Right. So
and they probably did not realize.
So it's worth understanding, how do people become a part of totalitarian movements? How does that happen? So and this isn't necessarily about totalitarianism. This is about how mass formation of a zeitgeist forms, where people have an agreed perspective on something that may not be based in any particular reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a scientific process. This
Yes.
has been observed in human society many, many times. When these factors are present, it is possible for this thing to happen. We know that about systems. This
Right.
is system analysis. If the system
Yes.
is human society
Yes.
and human psychology, we know that when these factors are present, it is possible for this to happen. For instance, if you are exhausted, stressed, and you've been hanging out with your snot-nosed niece all week, it is possible when those factors are present for you to get sick.
Right. Having been somebody who was in a mass formation of the cult that I was raised in, I'm listening to his information from an experience.
We love this.
Not from just like an outside, like, oh, this is a thing I've never heard or experienced before. Please tell me about it. It's like he's hitting the marks of my experience.
We were diagnosing these issues in the current zeitgeist before Matthias came along and wrote them all down super nicely in bullet points.
Right. So if you want to know what mass formation is, if you look it up, mass formation, aka mass psychology, aka mob psychology or crowd psychology, crowd behavior is heavily influenced by the loss of responsibility of the individual and the impression of universality of behavior, both of which increase with crowd size. So the more people get involved, the more powerful it is, of course. This is what turns a cult into a religion. 4 things that need to exist or be in place for mass formation to emerge. And we can talk about these individually, and we'll get through these 4, and then we can open up this thing to people who have comments or questions afterwards. There needs to be a lot of socially isolated people who experience a lack of social bond. That was happening before COVID.
Oh, yeah. What were we talking about for like 3 years is just like the existential dread of the millennials.
Yes, right. So that was already happening before COVID. But the interesting thing, there needs to be a socially isolated people. The internet does that.
Yeah.
But then we physically did it with the lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever, that condition was already
We already had a psychological issue.
It was already ripe in the society. And then it got put into turbo mode by actually locking everybody into the damn house.
Right.
Okay, so
we accentuated a pre-existing psychological condition.
4 things that need to be in place for mass formation to emerge. That one seems to have been in place.
Yeah.
Yes. There needs to be a lot of people who experience a lack of sense-making in life. As soon as COVID happened, we started talking about it. We're like, cat in the curve. Let's all take care of each other.
Bleach your groceries.
Who's at risk? The old people are at risk. How do we get groceries to them so they can stay home? Because I'm finding out that I'm not at great risk.
Yeah.
So I am willing to go grocery shopping for my elder friends and my people with comorbidities.
Totally.
How do we take care of people in this terrible pandemic? And then we learned new information that wasn't on MSNBC or Fox News. We started looking at these professors.
How's the death rate?
And these epidemiologists and statisticians and psychologists that were saying, hey, there's something a little fishy here. So there needs to be a lot of people who experience a lack of sense-making in life. So when we got kicked out of the radio station because of COVID, everybody was out of the radio station. We decided to start recording our show at home.
Yeah, many DJs
and
did
then
that.
Sending it to the station so we could continue our show. And what I launched into immediately was, I can't remember John Vervaeke. John Vervaeke, he's a professor up in Canada. He has this extensive YouTube series that is just like, if I was stuck on an island, I would be able to watch it because it's probably like 72 hours straight of
a philosophy course.
Of a philosophy course called The Meaning Crisis.
Which is what we are in as Homo sapiens right now.
Right. And so I was excited when we all got locked down because I thought I got a term from him in the early part of that series, which was the term of a kairos. And a kairos versus chronos. Chronos is time. A kairos is a moment in time where change might be more possible, where things could shift up. And I thought, wow, we're not happy with our society. Our political system is broken. We don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. Everybody knows it, but they're still limping along trying to support a party that we know is corrupt. This is the time. This is the kairos. This is where we are off work. We're out of our normal places. We're at home. We can look at ourselves.
People with
we can
pandemic
take
privilege.
Yes, people who could do that.
People with pandemic privilege, which means you have enough to eat. You're not afraid of losing your house. You're not locked at home with an abuser. You're not locked at home unable to get cancer screening or diabetes treatments when you need them. Can take some time and evaluate themselves and learn some things about their meaning in life.
Well, we thought it was going to be like 2 weeks.
Yeah, which the WHO has historically always recommended lockdowns in the face of new viruses for about 2 weeks to flatten the curve and give scientists the time to figure out what's going on.
Get a grip. Right. So I thought, okay, we got a couple of weeks here. This is, I think, just stopping the system for a second.
Oh, turn it off, turn it back on again.
And see if it reboots and defrags. I'm like, this is great. We get to defrag and maybe come up with a new story.
Reconnect in new ways.
This is where we get to actually have a vision. Democrats don't have a vision. Republicans don't have a vision. Libertarians don't have a vision. Like, Green Party has a vision, but where the hell are they? You know, like, this is a time for us to actually have volition in our own lives. Instead of being subject to the culture at play, we can be culture makers. This is where artists can stand up. This is where public intellectuals can stand up. This is where innovators can stand up. And we have problems, and we can solve the problems. Yeah. And this is the moment to do it. I was so excited. Anyway, there needs to be a lot of people who experience a lack of sense-making in life.
Meaning. Why am I here? Why do I have this job? Why am I with that person? Why am I living in this house?
So that was happening powerfully. And that's why I launched into that when we got locked down. Part number 3. There needs to be a lot of free-floating anxiety. Do you want to speak to this?
Okay, so so today I am through the roof anxious because after we finish this video, I'm going to go rehearse with the Butte Big Band for the first time in over a year.
Yeah.
And I've always had performance anxiety. I haven't always had performance anxiety. I've always loved performing, actually. And then my church and my mother's shutting me down over and over about loving to perform gave me performance anxiety. So now I'm afraid people are going to think I'm an egotistical maniac if I get up and start singing with the big band. And I'm just terrified of being perceived. I just don't want to be perceived.
That's a specific anxiety.
That's a specific anxiety. Sometimes I'll just be like doing the laundry and start feeling really anxious and stressed. And my mind is like, why am I anxious? Did I forget something? Maybe I'm forgetting something. Is there something coming up that I'm anxious about? What's my calendar like today?
Right.
So, and what I've had to start teaching myself
oxygen is a big part of that.
Is that anxiety is a chemical state in the brain. And that chemical state can be triggered by an event, a traumatic event or a remembrance of a traumatic event, such as my chronic trauma of being told that I am too much for everyone.
Too loud.
Center of attention, full of yourself.
Why are you so 6 foot tall?
Why are you so full of yourself? Why do you sound like a herd of elephants when you walk down the hallway? So there's chronic traumas that trigger an anxiety event, a chemical event in your brain. But then also your brain can also just do chemicals on its own and create a state of anxiety for no reason. Well, and then I go around and I make myself more anxious by trying to figure out why I'm anxious so that I can quote unquote solve my anxiety by knowing what's wrong. If I could just know what's wrong, then I would not feel as anxious.
So to extrapolate this into the larger condition, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, you asked me for examples.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about the larger condition. So we had Donald Trump was president. It was an election year. A lot of people were anxious about Donald Trump. And not just about Donald Trump, about the condition of our political process that Donald Trump was president and might be president again.
And the condition of their neighbors who voted for Donald Trump. Does this mean I'm unsafe when I go to the grocery store?
There was a lot of anxiety, and this is a lot of political stuff, but it's tied to the economical and the psychological and all that business. There were people who were anxious because their preferred candidate was the party that's supposed to be serving the voters.
What the people want.
The DNC had basically, it looked like they had rigged the campaign.
Again.
To a lot of people. It looked like it was rigged. And so again, second time. So that is anxiety provoking when you don't feel like you have any agency
I don't feel like I can trust
in your political process, right? And then the guy that they do pick for president doesn't look like he's super vital or connected to the time that we live in.
And what the people need.
He doesn't appear to me to be that way. So even if they were supporting their guy for president against the guy that they were afraid of, Trump, it wasn't an enthusiastic support for him.
We weren't all like excited
Yay,
about Biden.
Donald Trump. Yeah, no. So, and even a lot of Republicans were not super excited about Donald Trump, but they were so afraid of the left that they had to, same way that people were so afraid of the right, they had to, right? So.
And this is miseducation on all fronts.
There needs to be a lot of free-floating anxiety. I think there might have been some free-floating anxiety in the beginning of 2020.
And that's not even like going into our massively unhealthy country or the fact that
the system as a whole,
our planet is impoverished.
Right.
And we're not just talking about the U.S. These conditions are widespread across the country, except in a few key places such as like Norway and Sweden, who have who handled it differently than we did.
Yeah, Norway just said, forget about it now.
They have people. They're taking care of their people.
Yeah.
They don't have the same lack of social connection and free-floating anxiety that countries like Britain and the U.S. have with our like massive existential crisis, or the anxiety of being continually impoverished like places in South America and South Africa.
So the countries that have a higher quality of life
didn't handle the pandemic the same way that
we did. And what happened to the Canary? They were all going to die.
They didn't die anymore.
They actually died less.
They actually died less than we did.
Fascinating. Anyway, so let's go down to number 4.
You can find those numbers online.
There needs to be a lot of free-floating psychological discontent or anger. So people are out of control.
They don't feel safe.
They don't feel safe.
They don't know what's going on.
And so they really kind of need to find something or somebody to be mad at.
This is classic fight or
Donald
flight
Trump.
psychology.
The left, Donald Trump, whoever. We need to find an enemy.
Yeah. There has to be a bad guy.
Because I don't know how to do this myself. I don't know how I can fix it. So we need to find a bad guy. We need to find somebody that we can...
We have to fight someone.
These conditions were on steroids.
Even before the pandemic.
The pandemic comes along, and now we can go further. The rest of the video explains what the effects of that mass formation had, or what effects we could extrapolate came from the mass formation. For one, people feel happy to now have the thing about the mass formation where they say crowd behavior is heavily influenced by the loss of responsibility. So what that means is there's a virus. We can't do anything about that. They've got it. So now we just have to let them handle it, right? Whoever they are, the government, mandates, the lockdown, the mask, Fauci, the pharmaceutical companies, they've got it. So I have no responsibility in this anymore. So I get to just join in waiting for our hero, whatever the hero is.
I'm not the hero.
I'm not the hero. I can't do anything about it.
You must not do your own research.
So then, but I can do something. They said wear a mask. Now, that's part of the thing that made people angry at us. We weren't saying wear a mask. We weren't saying don't wear a mask.
And that made people angry. That made people angry.
That made people angry. What we were saying was our conversation over the mask is dangerous because you're politicizing a medical issue. And that's not science.
We should be able to know whether or not masks are saving lives. And if they are not saving lives, then we should be able to talk about that.
So we were looking at data where we're saying, let's look at mask mandates and non-mask mandates, and did it have a significant effect
on the death rate?
On the death rate. Did not.
Did not
have a significant effect on spread or the death rate.
You got to include the time axis.
Yes. Over time, it might have slowed it a bit, and we were in favor of that.
This
we're
is where,
let's
slow it
down.
Absolutely. But, and virus is going to virus.
That's a smart thing to do. But to pretend, and this is where some people were concerned about the mask, is that if you tell people to wear a mask, and it really doesn't have a massive significance in slowing transmission or changing the rate of death.
Yeah, the mask doesn't...
It doesn't do that.
Wearing a mask doesn't stop people from dying who are going to die when they get the virus.
Right.
Whoever's going to die when they get a new virus is going to die.
Theory, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But we were saying our conversation about the mask is dangerous because people are going to wear the mask and think that they're safe.
And think that they're not transmitting as much.
And that's dangerous. So we're not saying masks don't work. We're saying if people think they work, that's dangerous.
If people think that wearing a mask made out of a T-shirt by a loving and well-meaning person means that it's safe for them to go and visit their grandma,
This was part of the mass formation. It was a big manifestation of the mass formation, is that people thought, I can't do anything, but I can do this. And so it was really people like suddenly masks everywhere. People were making masks and running around like we had somebody pull up in a car and give us 2 masks they made. It was like suddenly there was a solidarity.
It's a loving thing. Yes.
And that solidarity was a part of the mass formation where people stopped thinking for themselves.
You must not do your own research.
Started trusting the authorities who we did not trust 2 months before.
Yeah.
Suddenly we trust them implicitly. And I thought, this is dangerous because I have natural immunity to bullshit. Because I've been through it before. My entire life has been disentangling myself from bullshit.
From just having somebody tell you something and you just take it as if it's reality without knowing for yourself whether it's reality or not. And this goes back to our conversation of how you actually know if you know something.
So what happens in mass formation is eventually you have this ritual that people can form around, and the mask became the ritual. If you're wearing the mask, that became a virtue signal. It doesn't have anything to do with science.
Like wearing a cross necklace.
It was about politics, and it was about virtue, and it was about showing that you're a good person.
Showing that you care.
That you care. It was a ritual, but it wasn't based in science. And so then the people who said that's not based in science became the enemy. And this is the evolution of the mask. And here's where it goes. This is the problem with totalitarianism, is this is the beginning of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
When totalitarian regimes come into play, this is what the gentleman in the video is articulating, and I'm sure if you look up totalitarian regimes and a timeline, maybe we should look up the timeline of what happens when totalitarian regimes come into power. What happens is 30% of the people just become adherents. We're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do, and they are going to be zealots for the cause because it gives them purpose and meaning that they didn't have before. Now we're a part of something. Another 40% are like, I don't know about that whole thing, but I guess I'm just going to go along with it because that's my family, that's my church, that's my workplace, that's my political party. So yeah, I'll just go along. I don't have the passion they have for this, but I'm not going to buck it because it's going to mess up my friends group or whatever. And then there's another 30% that are critical thinkers that say, nope, we need to have a conversation. We need to listen to some different information. We need to hold them accountable. We need to have that data checked. We need to not believe the science. We need to be involved in the science, right? So that's the other 30%. But what happens is when the 40 joined the initial 30 of zealots, it looks like 70% of the country believes in the thing.
And when consequences of speaking out are dire, it looks like nobody is thinking anything else. And so we all people that are wondering sit at home and feel isolated and crazy because we feel as though there's no one else out there saying the things that we're wondering. So it must just be us.
And so many people feel that way. And you don't know it. We have a lot of lurkers on our show. We have a lot of people that supported the formation of this studio.
Anonymously.
Anonymously because they didn't want to fall into problems with their friends groups.
Yeah.
Or their workplace or their political affiliation. So this is dangerous stuff. And
here's something that I learned. If somebody is feeling like they need to be sneaky, the problem is not their sneakiness. The problem is the environment that is causing them to feel as though they need to be sneaky. If a kid needs to be sneaky, that means that there is not open communication and mutual respect in the home. The kid feels like they can't express their needs or desires in a way and be treated safely and respectfully by their parents or authority figures. And the same thing goes societally. If someone feels like they need to be sneaky or be quiet about something, the sneakiness is not evidence that what they're thinking is bad. It's evidence that the environment is toxic and it does not have open communication and mutual respect.
So what happened to us, we were canaries in the coal mine. We were very much in the beginning. We actually got invited by the NewsHour guy on the radio station because we had been doing deep dives into the virus. And he's like, come and tell us what you've learned.
Give us the data because we were talking about how to be safe in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because that's what we knew in the beginning.
That's all we knew. And then when we started saying, hey, this mass debate is dangerous because it's not scientific and it's not going to help us. If you're not going to shame people into compliance, especially in a hyper partisanized political environment. You're not going to suddenly.
Well, you can shame some people into compliance.
Well, if the Democrats are like, wear a mask, the Republicans are going to be like, okay. Sure.
If the Democrats like it, it must be good. No, we're already in a fucked up state.
And then what happened, what got worse is that when Trump, who's I think is some people still think he's
a mastermind.
There's some masterminding there,
Yeah.
and I'm open to that argument. I don't see it.
Yeah.
I'm still open to the argument.
I've never seen evidence of that myself.
But I think he
presents himself.
He's a flim-flam man.
Yeah.
He's a huckster. He's a carpetbagger.
He's a businessman.
He's a businessman. He's a showman.
Mm-hmm.
He knows how to whoop up a crowd. That's a skill. That's a talent, right? So he's the president, right? So he has access to information. So somebody come up and says hydrochloroquine, and he's like, "Hey, hydroxychloroquine."
Yeah.
I don't want the algorithm to hear me say it right. Like he says, "How much are you?" And then people are like, "Fuck that shit. He's an idiot," right? And
obviously, everything Trump says is bad.
Ivermectin. Oh, fuck that shit, right? So the left shot themselves in the foot by just whatever he says is wrong. And so even a broken clock is right twice a day. This guy does have some advisors that had some good information, even though he's a buffoon.
Right.
But because he said it, the left just drips with like delight in making fun of anybody who did anything he said.
Yeah.
And if you go, I'd like to publish this other, I'm going to show this other article that I wrote last week, which shows this study that was going on. Not a study, it was an actual experiment that went on in
you find it, I'll tell.
Yeah. I'll find it.
So an entire state in India of like 900,000 people or some egregiously enormous number, the health professionals in that state in India told the WHO, they're like, we're going to send health professionals to every household in our state and give them a basket of healthcare goods to help them in this pandemic. And at this point, India was just beginning to blow up with cases and deaths, largely due to massive widespread poverty and horrible sanitary conditions. And so the health professionals took a basket to every single household and did not disclose what was in the basket. And then the WHO was like, oh, this is great. We love this. They reported that health professionals in India were sending someone to each house to coach people on how to protect themselves from the coronavirus. They talked about sanitary measures, and they talked about how, clean water, and they provided them with medical goods to help try to stem the flow of SARS-CoV-2 illnesses and deaths in this state in India. And then cases plummeted. They went from kind of rising into a pop like the rest of India did to completely crashing down to single-digit case numbers and no deaths in like almost 1 million people, while all of the states around them were just blowing up with sadness, sickness, and death. And then that state reported back to the WHO what was in their baskets. And the WHO has declined to share that information because it goes against the mainstream story about idiots sucking horse paste.
It also goes against much of the funding for the WHO.
It also goes against this story that there's nothing we can do to save our lives from SARS-CoV-2 when we've known for over a year now that early aggressive treatment with vitamin C and vitamin D minimizes SARS-CoV-2 effects down to less than a week and prevents hospitalization, intubation, and death.
Cameron Cruson says, I recognize that phenomenon, R.E. Trump and the left. It's bad, but sort of understandable when you have such a horrible buffoon who does so much wrong that otherwise reasonable people become more polarized and knee-jerk condemn everything Trump said and did. This is
the problem.
Mass formation.
This is the problem.
This is mass formation.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer... it's totally understandable.
It's totally understandable, and it's also extremely unhealthy and dangerous.
Yes, but very understandable.
Absolutely understandable. I would love to just say I hate everything Stalin ever said.
So he says that was caused by Trump. I would say that was caused by a broken system that Trump exploited. Trump didn't just appear
magically
out of the ether. Trump stepped into a horribly broken system. Trump, in the words of Michael Moore in 2016, said Trump is going to be, he called it when nobody else said Trump could be president. He said Trump is going to be a Molotov cocktail hurled at D.C. because there are a massive amount of people whose voices are not being heard, who are left out of the story. They're broke, income inequality is not shifting, and they don't have a voice. So they didn't like Trump. They threw him like a Molotov cocktail to say, fuck you,
Fuck
to everybody who was
system.
not listening to them. So Trump didn't do it. We hurled Trump at DC because we, the general population, I'm not saying me in particular, I didn't vote for Trump. The general population said, we're done not being listened to. Go deal with this bullshit. And we had to deal with that bullshit. It wasn't Trump. It could have been anybody. But Trump just happened to be cartoon clownish enough to push people over the edge. And then it brought all these people into the political scene that didn't know shit about politics. So many of my friends are now political experts. And they're out there making phone calls for candidates and blue no matter who. And I'm like, this is the mass formation beginning.
Right. You haven't been involved in the politics of the last 60 years or studied the politics of the last 60 years, but you're going to start telling people what's going on.
Cameron Cruson says, but on the other hand, this mass formation has been the right wing's approach to everything the left has done for decades.
Okay, let's recap. What is a mass formation?
Yeah.
A mass formation happens when certain conditions are present in the human experience. The conditions that need to be present is free-floating anxiety, a lack of meaning, free-floating aggression, and a lack of social connection. So when those conditions are present in the human experience, a mass formation can occur or be engineered to occur when people either latch onto a bad guy and a solution or are fed a bad guy and a solution.
I would agree with him to the point that the Tea Party was an early mass formation.
Yeah.
It was a rejection of the two-party system, and it was an insurgent political movement. And some say it was grassroots, some say it was astroturfed.
Oh, artificially concocted.
I know one of the guys at the very beginning of the Tea Party movement. He was in Nevada City, California. He was very much a libertarian. He made a lot of sense. I didn't agree with a lot of his stuff, but he made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And his motivation was completely understandable. However, there's other people that said, yeah, the Koch brothers got involved and funded
the Tea Party.
astroturfed the grassroots movement.
Well, but this happens a lot of the times. I mean, we've seen this happen in movies, sure, but it happens outside of movies. The reason that it's in movies is because it happens outside of movies is that there are well-meaning people, zealots, and people who are on fire for a cause, and they get poked and prodded by someone in power who wants something.
Yes.
That happens in real life.
So I think
sometimes we find out about it, sometimes we don't.
Mass formation is not a singular thing, but like bubbles, sometimes bubbles combine to form bigger bubbles. They pop into the other bubble. And much of what's going on with my friends in the left is
that's a great analogy.
Is a reaction of the right.
Yeah.
It's a reaction to the right, which the left has been doing for decades. Is like somebody told me years ago that the traditional role of the left is to do the harder job politically of getting people to imagine something that has yet to happen. Like maybe we need to deal with recycling because we didn't have plastic before or aluminum before. Now we have it. So we have to imagine how to deal with this problem, which means getting people to imagine something that has not happened.
Right. We have to come up with a story or a solution that does not exist yet.
Right. That's a harder job than what the right has been doing for decades, which is we're going to get back to a good old time before things got fucked up. That's an easier sell because people know where that place is in their minds because they saw it on a movie. Whether it ever existed or not, they can see it in the movies or the song.
Or they remember their grandma's house.
Story or whatever. And they're like, yeah, I want to get back to that feeling, right? The left has, no, we're not going back, and we have to go somewhere we've never been before. That used to be the difficult job of the left, and they abdicated with the advent of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism saw the pull of the right, saying, we got to get hard on crime. We got to, they started, here's a danger, and people can react to the danger. So the left started getting hard on crime, started becoming fiscally like the Republicans. And so the voices of the left in politics and at the head of the party became corporately controlled, influenced.
We know this.
And in doing so, there was no longer a vision being offered by the left.
Mm-hmm.
There was only, we're not as bad as the right.
For like decades before Trump.
So what we're lacking here is meaning, and what we're lacking here is vision.
Yeah.
And whenever you try to articulate a vision, what I tried to talk about vision in 2016, 17, 18, 15, whatever, everybody's like, but Trump. I'm like, this is the problem why we have Trump.
Is because we continue to lack vision.
We keep locking in on this fear-based reality, and we're not giving ourselves a moment to find a pathway out. Adam Curtis is the guy that really brought to my attention this idea that we have been in crisis mode since the 50s. We are no longer, our politicians are not here to help us co-create a better world.
We're not getting back to the golden age.
We're only just dealing with this crisis and then this crisis and then this crisis. Oh, and I'll deal with this crisis. We're not creating our reality. We're not creating our society. We're not dealing with actual issues, the systemic issues. We're dealing with effects of the issues, just like our medical system is. We didn't do with COVID. This is a nice little metaphor. We did not, when people started to get sick, we did not tell them how to take care of themselves so they don't end up on an intubator and end up in the hospital. We just said,
they could have.
Come back when you're really fucked up.
If you want
and that's what we're doing with our politics. That's what we're doing with our medicine. It's the same thing because it's all tied by the same money. So until we can articulate a vision, we're just going to be in crisis mode.
Reacting to
crisis. Which means that our amygdala is hijacked, which means that we are not reasonable people.
And so absolutely, it makes sense to just diss everything Trump says because it makes you feel safe to know who the bad guy is. I think we need to address Cameron was voraciously requesting sources about what we were saying about masks and their effectiveness.
Okay. So
I don't know how to address that.
I have that.
Like, and I'll just say, like, we've been talking about and dissecting and researching and sharing sources largely on our Facebook page and in these live streams and previously on our radio shows for over a year now on this subject. So we have many sources.
Well,
So we have many sources, right? And it's this concept that you are able to learn yourself.
Yes.
You can observe data, and learn something from it. You are capable of doing that. Right. But it's also sometimes, and I understand that you have a source to go with this, and it's saying it in...
No, it's not a source. This is that article written by the former dean of Harvard Medical School.
Okay.
Where he's saying we have to listen to scientists with alternative points of view, and he has lots of hyperlinks where he's saying there are perspectives on the mask.
Yeah.
And he gives hyperlinks to people saying we don't have enough data. It's been a long-standing policy never to do that. COVID is not significantly different as a virus to have changed decades-long mask policy.
Yeah.
So it's not one thing.
Yeah. There's no one
yes
source
or no.
Right.
This is our whole point.
Yeah.
We're not saying masks are good or masks are bad. We're saying we need to have a discussion, and there's a lot of information out there. And when you say just wear a mask, that is totalitarianism.
And
that is not thinking. That is mass formation psychology. That is mob psychology.
We need to figure out how to address this because as we continue into realms that people get up in arms about, we're going to keep getting questions like the one that Cameron is asking.
What's
Cameron is requesting, please compile your best sources for your foundation and hang that stuff on a banner on your wall.
That's not what we do.
Well, and I think, I think this is important to I want to talk about this. Do we have
a syllabus?
Do we have a duty to our viewers to always provide them with our work
No, that's
at
not the
the
premise.
moment that they look for it?
That's not the premise of the show. We're sharing our journey.
It's all over our Facebook page, but
We're
you're
sharing,
right. We don't have one spot where you can go and look at what sources we've found for whether or not masks prevent deaths.
It's 151.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of massage that up before we just walk away from that idea.
Yeah.
And then I want to spend some time on the website.
Okay.
We go away.
I mean, but how? Because I suppose I could have been keeping like a bookmarks folder on my computer of every single source I've ever studied from.
I think it's a different in approach. And I think we're approaching things differently than Cameron is. And that's fine. Diversity of approaches is really great. Our approach may not be like your approach.
Well, what are you saying? You think Cameron's approach is that he just wants to know if it's true or not?
Yes. And I don't think it's that easy because I don't think it is either true or false. I think for us, the reason we have not become fundamentalist mask enforcement people is because, and this is what's really unfortunate, and it has to do with our broken systems. That's why it's not really about the mask for me. It's about our ability to question and understand sources of information. So when the Surgeon General and Anthony Fauci and all these people in February said, no, don't wear a mask. If you're a healthy person, don't wear a mask. And then they said, everybody must wear a mask. Everybody changed their mind at sudden. And that policy did not have significant data to deviate from decades-long mask policy. There was nothing that happened. No data came in where they're like, yes, the masks are a good way to keep us from spreading the virus. There was no data that came in that said that. Since then, there's people who are rushing to conduct studies to confirm their biases of no mask or mask. But that stuff is still coming out. Mm-hmm. And you can go, that's not my job to show you, to define for you whether masks are good or bad. I think it's your job to find out for yourself. I have found out for myself that it's out. The idea, I went to the school board meeting. So right now they're trying to get kids to wear masks in the school. To me, from my understanding of how this shit works, kids are not at significant risk. Some kids get sick. I used to get sick. Friends of mine used to get sick. Sometimes a bunch of people get the flu.
Yeah.
And then they get over it, and that's good for their immune system.
Yeah.
Their immune system adapts. They're more resilient in the world. Mm-hmm. Kids are the ones who should be getting the virus, epidemiologically speaking, because they're the most resilient. And that was the early information, is that's how we're going to reach herd immunity, is people who are not at significant risk of dying should probably just go through this novel virus because we're not putting it back. The genie's not going back in the bottle.
Yeah, the virus is going to virus, and it's never going away.
40% of white-tailed deer tested have coronavirus.
Yeah.
It's not like we're going to get to zero, and that was the premise for a long time. That was the mask premise, is like, we just have to get it under control and get rid of the virus. We're not going to get rid of the virus. But people are still working off of those memes from 2020.
That we're just going to fight COVID and it's go away.
COVID. Where there's no fighting COVID. We have to build immunity.
There's taking care of
to
yourself.
A new virus.
Yeah. And helping the people around you be safe when they encounter the virus.
The mask is a distraction as far as I'm concerned. It's a political deviation.
Yeah.
It's purely political.
And I appreciate Cameron participating. And I want new viewers. I want new participants. I want to build a community. And I'm recognizing, and let me please, I'm recognizing that this is going to keep happening as we build a community and as people join in, they're going to hear us saying things that we've been saying for years. And they're going to want to know, well, but what about this? I completely understand that Cameron is coming into our story new, and he's hearing our theories new, and he's heard them expressed by other people in the past in stupid ways, in potentially selfish ways or lazy ways. But we've shown our work. We have hours and hours and hours of shows all available on our Facebook page, and all of our sources and all of our theories are available on our Facebook page as well. And I think, I completely understand wanting someone to just give you the thing, but we don't have time for that, unfortunately. I wish I could. This is like coming into the second semester of the class without doing the first semester of the class, I guess. Not saying that we're doing a class. I'm just saying, this is a rolling conversation.
Yeah.
And we're going to keep touching on these topics.
Right.
For me, what I did when I saw how much people were suffering and hating and bitching and cutting people out of their lives because of the mask, I was like, is this really worth it or not? I started seeing suffering, and I was like, is this suffering worth it? Are the masks saving lives? Are the masks stopping people from dying who would have died? And so I started looking at countries and regions, health departments' data of amount of deaths per population. So you have to look at the percentage of deaths, not the number of deaths. Obviously, New York City has way more people who have died than
Montana.
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Because there's millions more people in New York City than in Cincinnati. So you have to look at deaths per 100,000. So this is what I started doing painstakingly with my personal time, using data sources on government websites and health department websites. And I would compare periods of time of towns and states and countries who chose to enforce mask mandates versus places that did not enforce mask mandates. And what we can see is, barring pre-existing conditions, such as countries with higher levels of obesity experience higher death rates.
Or higher PMT in the atmosphere.
Countries with higher pollution levels experience higher death rates. These are things we've known for over a year that we could all know. We could all be knowing these things. But barring those other conditions, if you're looking at mask mandates, masks do not keep people from dying who were going to die anyway. The number of people who died, it may have happened quickly, or it may have happened over a longer period of time, but by the time the entire country or region or state has encountered the virus, which is what happens naturally over time, the same percentage of people had died.
Look at Sweden. They didn't have the mandates. And there was no wild spike in deaths. So you can compare the data, because this is the thing's going to wash out over a long time. So we can keep fighting about right now, but over time, and you can see like when an arrow was shot, you can see the trajectory of things going. When people had mask mandates and people did not have mask mandates, and there was very, very, very little difference between the two, I think you can extrapolate some information from that.
We're not doing post-orthodoxy to prove points.
Yes.
We're literally doing post-orthodoxy to break down blind belief.
I got to say something. Cameron says, my understanding of Fauci's mask flip-flop in February was owed to concern for shortage. So, i.e., Fauci then knowingly lied to us, is what you're saying. Because that's what you're saying. And even if it was for our own good, people who are politically opposed to him are going to seize upon that as an absolute bold-faced lie, and we cannot trust that institution. That's bad form on Fauci's part.
Not everybody.
And when you say that that's a singular flip-flop, that is not the case.
It's not.
It's not a singular flip-flop. If you trust Fauci, then maybe you think that. If you distrust Fauci, you will find other information that shows beyond a reasonable doubt,
because it's him saying it,
that is a singular flip-flop. Fauci's a problematic character. He's a political character.
Yeah.
And this is a medical issue. I know he's at the NIH.
Well, and Cameron said earlier,
character.
He's like, Fauci had to tell people because stupid
he did not.
He's like, stupid people won't discern properly, so we just have to tell them a simple thing. I'm like,
that's why we need totalitarianism, because we don't have an informed population, so we just have to tell them what to do. We have to nudge them in the right direction because they're too stupid to do it. So that's not the country I want to live in.
It sounds like Cameron is okay with totalitarianism for people's own good.
He's fine with censorship as well.
Okay.
Censorship is fine for him.
We have different ethics.
It's very different. Yeah, and that's ethical, exactly, at this point.
That's a valid position. I know lots of people who prefer totalitarianism in certain circumstances for someone's own good. Dark and I have even talked about the concept of benevolent dictatorship because it seems really hard to get people to all move together towards something healthy.
Well, we're getting, and our show is not about masks. Our show is not about COVID. Our show is about cognitive liberty. It's
critical thinking.
Critical thinking and learning. So these little sidebars, these are all things that we've done our research on. And in the process of our show, we have shown where we got our information. This is not a show about masks. This is not an episode about masks. This is an episode about a psychological phenomena that is causing people to use masks to beat each other up. And this is where we're going to go. This is the problem, is right now it's a virtue signal, and then the people who don't do it are the enemy, and atrocities often follow that pattern.
Yeah.
The Democrats used to be the big tent. We embrace all people. The Democrats now seem to have an identity where you're not a good Democrat unless you hate your neighbor who disagrees with you. That's a strong statement, but I see it all the time in my feed. People delighting in somebody dying from COVID who had a different perspective than theirs. People overjoyed at other people's misfortune because we live in a society where we don't have good information and people have made bad choices. Some people have made good choices, and we don't know what is what. But when we like delight in the demise and death of people we disagree with, that is fucking dangerous. And our show is about that. It's about the larger
meta
issue.
show. This is a meta conversation. We discuss specific conversations. We discuss specific topics from the perspective of this meta mindset of trying to free our minds from bullshit and get beyond binary thinking and have cognitive liberty and critical thinking skills and the ability to talk about complicated things. So I think we got to wrap up. It's been 2 hours. I know it's never fun to end it.
I know, and I'm going to do this anyway.
Do what?
For the folks that are watching our show. We've spent the last couple of years working on this little project.
I can type it in.
Where we have a website. It's become more and more difficult to have open conversations on YouTube, to have open conversations on Facebook. Censorship is a real thing. And in my experience, personal experience, it's dangerous. And to have an exchange of ideas is important, even if some of the ideas are not orthodox ideas, especially if they are not orthodox ideas. So we have built a website that is my resume. It is about my artwork. It's about my photography. It's about my writing. It's about my story. Same thing with Ainsley. It is her story and her background, who we are, which gives some context for why we're doing what we're doing. It's also on that website. It's darksevier.com. It's ainsleysevier.com. You can get to the website through those things.
Or postorthodoxy.com.
Or postorthodoxy.com. You can go there. And we have a button where you can support the show. So right now we're doing all of this of our own accord. We work different jobs and we hustle here and there in order to carve out some time to do some research and come in and present to you our process of trying to understand what the fuck is happening in the world right now and how to have a better time in a complex world where we're told that everything blows. We're just sharing our process here. We're not prescribing solutions. We do want to start putting more information on the show because there's some really great shit happening in the world right now.
We have a segment that we've named in honor of my sister Sarah, Any Some Dessert, which is what she used to say when she was 3, and she wanted to know if there was some dessert after dinner, because we got some constructive feedback from people who were like, I like your conversations, but I'm feeling kind of hopeless. What can we do?
So
is there any hope?
It's hard to wrangle this show into a format because we do zoom out and zoom in. And then we also
do participation.
And we want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
This is not about us like presenting a show and then giving it to you to eat.
Yes.
This is about us co-creating a reality and a culture, actually, that I want to live in.
A community.
And it has to do with communication. And so we've built a website. We're going to be on that website. You will be able to start finding our forums where we can have ongoing conversations outside of this 2-hour period where we do our show. That will help us inform future shows. That will help us have a better sense of the kind of people who are interested in the work that we're doing and help build a community because, all it takes is an angry listener to report us to YouTube, and the algorithm will take us down. We're really fragile. And so we've built a place that we have not had to retreat to, but we are in the process of building so that we can have open communications for people who are interested in critical thinking and cognitive liberty.
Even when it's scary.
Even when it's scary. So I really appreciate Cameron's conversation and being involved in the show. This is why we have this chat bot. Mm-hmm. This is so we can be involved with
Absolutely.
people. And we always welcome participation as long as it is constructive.
Yeah.
As long as people are...
Even if we're disagreeing.
As long as it's not disingenuous, as long as it's not trolling. We can handle a little bit of trolling.
Yeah.
But when it starts to drag down the development of the show or the development of an idea, that's when we have to find other means to keep the conversation moving forward. And I'm not talking about censorship.
Yeah.
I'm talking about public shaming. To try to avoid. I
think Cameron was participating, and
Yes,
he
it's
researched
great.
the video ahead of time and had notes, and we didn't get to all of his comments.
It's tough to do it all in 2 hours.
It's very hard to get to everything in 2 hours.
We can continue the conversation offline.
Absolutely.
These videos are on YouTube and they're on Facebook. There is a comment thread that is still available for comments. If anybody wants to have, because a lot of people don't watch the show until after the fact, and then they comment as they
After
go.
the fact.
We check back in.
I would
and
like
we
to go
continue
back
the
to some of
conversation.
Cameron's.
Yes.
I would like to. Cameron says he's going to go lick the Eiffel Tower now.
All right.
And then you'll know it's really there, at least on this plane.
Right. So that's where we're at. We're really glad to have had everybody here
Yeah,
for the show. We're glad to be back on the air. We'll be back Wednesday at noon. Correct?
Yeah, Wednesday at noon.
For another
Noon Montana time.
2-hour-ish show. And then we have a host of guests coming in. They're going to be zooming in. If you know somebody that you would like to be a guest on the show, or you yourself think that you would be a good candidate as a guest on the show,
Hit us up.
Hit us up and let us know.
And because we can have guests from anywhere on the planet, and we will move the show time for you.
Yeah, we'll move. We never got a name for our intern here, but she can be moved aside for an actual real life flesh and blood person if they're within driving range. Otherwise, we can wire you in from anywhere on the planet. We haven't got off-planet capabilities yet.
Or parallel
Not yet.
universe capabilities. If you're bored and you don't have anything to read this weekend, I'll recommend Of Ducks and Universes as a really fun jaunt into parallel universe concepts.
Oh, right on.
It's a fiction about neighborhood parallel universes. All right, guys, we're
Thanks, everybody. That was fun.
wrap it up. Thank you
Yep.
so much. It's never a soft ending. We just have to end it. And
Oh, are we going to play a song?
no,
we didn't get permission
I didn't have
yet.
time.
All
I
right.
didn't have time. It's always going to get better. It's always better.
One more thing. At the end of the show, because we are building community here, I have a lot of really wonderful artist friends that have been spending their time in the pandemic in the studio making some nice music. If you know any artists that would like to have their music featured on the show, we're looking for artists to feature at the end of the show to play out, put up a nice card, and then have some music that you probably never heard before.
We have to have direct permission from them so that I can screenshot it. So when Facebook tries to censor me for sharing somebody's music, I can be like, they said I could.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we want to start highlighting musicians as our outros and give you access to artists that you haven't heard of.
Yeah. So thanks for playing. We'll be back Wednesday.
Ta-ta!